A routine traffic stop, 90 seconds, maybe less. No speeding, no reckless driving, nothing that would normally raise a red flag. And yet, by the time it was over, that driver walked away without a license for the next 6 months. Not because they did something dangerous, but because they broke a law that didn't even exist 3 weeks earlier. That's the part nobody sees coming. The rules didn't just change, they shifted underneath people in real time. And right now, there's one specific law, number 3 on this list, that's already triggered over 12,000 citations across the country, with an average fine pushing $500. Most of those drivers had no idea they were doing anything wrong, which raises a bigger question. If the system can catch that many people that fast, how many more are driving around today completely exposed without realizing it? Because these aren't small updates. This isn't about going a few miles over the speed limit or rolling through a stop sign. These are structural changes to how you're allowed to drive, where you can place things inside your car, how your vehicle is monitored, and in some cases, whether your car will even let you drive at all. And the scariest part is you can follow every habit you've built over the last 10, 20, even 30 years and still be breaking the law the moment you pull onto the road. So, before you assume you're in the clear, there's something you need to see because the margin for error in 2026 is basically gone. I spend a lot of time tracking how driving laws evolve, not just what changes on paper, but how those changes are actually being enforced on real drivers like you. And what happened at the start of 2026 isn't normal. This is the biggest shift in driving regulations we've seen in over a decade. Entire states rolled out new enforcement systems, redefined what counts as a violation, and in some cases introduced technology that's watching your behavior in ways most people don't even realize yet. So if you've been driving like it's still 2025, there's a very real chance you're already out of compliance without knowing it. And that's exactly how people are getting caught. Good drivers, careful drivers, people who've never had issues before suddenly getting hit with fines, points, or worse. What I'm going to do in this video is walk you through all 10 of these new laws, starting from the ones that seem small but are catching thousands of people all the way up to the top 3 that are causing the biggest financial and legal damage right now. And more importantly, I'll show you exactly what you need to change starting today so you don't become one of those statistics. Because once you see how these are being enforced, you'll understand why so many drivers are getting blindsided and why the next one on this list is already costing people hundreds of dollars over something that used to be completely normal. For years, there was an unspoken understanding between drivers and the road itself. That brief moment when a light turns yellow, you had just enough time to clear the intersection. Not anymore. In 2026, that margin has been completely erased. 14 states have now synchronized high resolution enforcement cameras directly with traffic signal systems down to the exact millisecond the light turns red. Previously, many of these systems allowed a small buffer, about half a second, giving drivers a realistic chance to clear safely. That buffer is gone. Now, if your rear tires are even slightly behind the line when the light flips, the system automatically flags a violation. No warning, no discretion, no officer to explain your situation to, just a ticket generated instantly. And here's where it gets more aggressive. These cameras aren't judging whether you drove safely through the intersection. They're measuring position with extreme precision. Your bumper either crossed in time or it didn't. That's all that matters. In states like Florida and New York, these violations aren't just fines anymore. They're being reported directly to insurance companies. One mistake at the wrong intersection could quietly cost you far more in premium increases over the next few years than the ticket itself. What makes this especially dangerous is how natural the old habit still feels. You see yellow, you calculate distance, you go. But that instinct now works against you. The system is no longer built around human judgment. It's built around exact timing, which means the safest move isn't to make it, it's to stop every time. Because when the margin for error drops to zero, even a perfect driver can get caught doing what used to be completely acceptable. And what's coming next takes that same zero tolerance mindset and applies it inside your car. You've probably heard, don't text and drive more times than you can count. But in 2026, that rule has evolved into something much stricter and much easier to violate without realizing it. Several states, including California, Ohio, and Pennsylvania, have now shifted to what's called primary enforcement for device handling, which means an officer Or, more often now, an automated system doesn't need any other reason to cite you. If a phone is in your hand while your vehicle is on a public roadway, that alone is enough. And yes, that includes when you're stopped. Red light, traffic jam, drive through, it doesn't matter. If the engine is on and you're in the roadway environment, holding your phone is now a violation. What's catching people off guard is how this is being enforced. AI assisted cameras mounted on overpasses and patrol vehicles can now detect when a driver is holding a device, even briefly. You don't have to be texting. You don't have to be scrolling. Just holding it is enough. One quick glance down to change a song or check a notification, and you've already crossed the line. The fines alone are frustrating, but the bigger issue is what happens after that. If you're involved in an accident and there's evidence your phone was in your hand, even if you weren't at fault, insurance companies now have more leverage to argue that you contributed to the situation. And that can mean reduced payouts or denied claims altogether. But here's where it gets even more precise and where thousands of drivers are getting caught without realizing it. Even if your phone isn't in your hand, even if you think you're doing everything right by using a mount, the exact placement of that phone inside your car is now regulated in ways that didn't exist before. And what used to make you compliant might now be putting you at risk. Up until recently, using a phone mount felt like the responsible solution. Keep your hands free, keep your eyes up, follow the rules. And for a long time, that was enough. But in 2026, that same setup could now be the exact reason you get cited. Or worse, lose money in a situation you didn't even cause. 17 states have introduced specific placement laws that dictate exactly where your phone is allowed to sit inside your vehicle. Not generally, not loosely, but precisely. And the wording sounds simple at first. Your device cannot obstruct your view of the road, traffic signals, or pedestrians. Reasonable, right? The problem is how strictly that's now being interpreted. In states like California, Arizona, and Florida, mounting your phone in the center of your windshield, even if it's tucked just beneath your rear view mirror, is now considered a violation. That placement, which millions of drivers have used for years, is now officially classified as obstructing your forward field of vision. The only consistently safe zones, the lower right corner of your windshield, or directly on the dashboard. Anywhere else starts to fall into a gray area that enforcement is no longer treating as gray. And this isn't just about getting pulled over. The real consequences show up after something goes wrong. There was a case in Phoenix where a driver was rear-ended at a stoplight. Completely not their fault, but their phone was mounted in the center of the windshield. When the insurance companies reviewed the incident, that detail became part of the evaluation. The argument was simple. The mount placement violated updated state guidelines, which implied reduced situational awareness. The result, their payout was cut by 40%. A small setup decision turned into thousands of dollars lost. That's the shift happening here. These laws aren't just enforced on the road, they're being used after the fact to determine liability, responsibility, and how much protection you actually get. So even if you think you're safe, because you're hands-free, the question now is, are you positioned legally? Because if not, you're exposed in ways most drivers haven't even considered yet. And that same pattern, where a rule expands beyond what people expect, is exactly what's happening with the next law, except this time it's not inside your car. It's what you do when you pass someone else on the road. You already know you're supposed to move over for police cars, ambulances, and emergency vehicles stopped on the shoulder. That's been standard for years. But as of January 2026, that rule has expanded dramatically. What's now being called the All Vehicle Move Over Law has effectively gone national, and it applies to far more situations than most drivers realize. If you see any vehicle on the shoulder with hazard lights on, whether it's a stranded driver, a tow truck, a delivery van, or someone changing a tire, you are now legally required to either move out of the closest lane or significantly reduce your speed, and not just a slight slowdown. In many states, the requirement is to drop at least 20 mph below the posted speed limit if you cannot safely change lanes. On paper, the goal is clear. Protect people who are vulnerable on the side of the road. But in practice, enforcement has become far more aggressive than drivers expect. Patrol vehicles are now equipped with side-facing cameras that monitor passing traffic, specifically looking for drivers who fail to move over or slow down enough, and the penalties reflect how seriously this is being taken. In some jurisdictions, this isn't just a traffic infraction anymore. It's classified as reckless endangerment. That means higher fines, points on your license, and in certain cases, mandatory court appearances. What makes this tricky is that not every situation gives you a clean opportunity to comply perfectly. Heavy traffic, tight spacing, fast moving lanes. It's not always easy to move over safely, but here's the key. Enforcement is often based on what your behavior looks like from the outside. If you can't change lanes, you need to make it obvious that you're slowing down and responding to the situation. Because from an officer's perspective, or a camera reviewing the footage later, it's not about what you intended to do, it's about what it looked like you did. And that shift from intention to visible compliance is showing up across multiple laws this year. Which brings us to the next one, where even something as simple as turning on your wipers can quietly put you in violation if you're not thinking one step ahead. There's a moment most drivers don't even think about. Light rain starts falling, just enough to blur the windshield a little, so you tap your wipers on maybe once every few seconds. It feels minor, routine, almost automatic. But in 2026, that small action now carries a legal requirement that's catching thousands of drivers completely off guard. In 29 states, the rule is now absolute. If your windshield wipers are on, your headlights must also be on. No exceptions for time of day, no exceptions for light drizzle, no exceptions for intermittent use. Wipers on means headlights on, period. And the enforcement isn't just coming from officers sitting on the side of the road. In several states, traffic cameras and automated systems can now detect this mismatch. They can identify the motion of your wipers and compare it to your lighting status. If your headlights aren't fully activated, including your tail lights, you can receive a ticket in the mail days later, complete with visual evidence. That's what makes this so easy to miss. You don't get pulled over. There's no warning. It just shows up. And here's where many drivers make a critical mistake. They assume their daytime running lights count. They don't. Daytime running lights typically only illuminate the front of your vehicle at reduced brightness. This law requires full headlight activation, which includes your rear lights as well. If your tail lights aren't on, you're still in violation, even if the front of your car looks lit. The fines might seem relatively small compared to some of the other laws, usually between $75 and $200, but that's not the real issue. The real issue is how effortlessly this can happen without you realizing it. A quick tap of the wipers, a short drive in light rain, and you've already crossed the line. The simplest way to eliminate that risk is to hardwire the habit. Wipers on, headlights on every time? No thinking required. Because as you're starting to see, 2026 driving laws aren't just about big mistakes. They're built around catching small everyday behaviors that used to be harmless. And once those small violations start stacking up, the consequences escalate much faster than most people expect. Because now it's not just about whether you get a ticket, it's about how those tickets accumulate over time. And in several major states, the entire math behind your driving record has changed. Historically, most states tracked violations over an 18-month period. That gave drivers some breathing room. Older infractions would fall off relatively quickly, and minor mistakes didn't necessarily follow you for long. But as of February 2026, states like New York, Illinois, and Florida have officially expanded that window to 24 months, which means every ticket, every point, every infraction now stays with you longer. But the timeline is only part of the shift. The weighting of those violations has also increased, and in some cases, dramatically. Take New York as an example. The threshold for automatic license suspension has been lowered from 11 points to 10. At the same time, certain violations have become significantly more expensive in terms of points. Passing a stopped school bus, which used to carry 5 points, can now hit you with 8. Speeding in a construction zone, that's now an automatic 8 points in some areas, regardless of how far over the limit you were. And that ties into another major change happening nationwide. Construction zone multipliers. In 38 states, any moving violation that occurs in a marked construction zone now carries double the points. Not double the fine, double the impact on your license. So something that would normally give you 2 points suddenly becomes 4. 3 becomes 6, and it adds up fast. What catches people off guard is that these zones don't require active workers to be present. If the signs are up, the zone is active. You could be driving through late at night, no construction in sight, and still be subject to the enhanced penalties. That's where the risk compounds. Two seemingly minor mistakes spread out over 2 years can now push you past the suspension threshold. Not higher insurance, actual loss of your license. And once that happens, the process of reinstatement becomes its own challenge with fees, waiting periods, and long term financial impact. So the strategy here isn't complicated, but it is critical. Treat every construction zone as zero tolerance and assume every point you receive will stay with you longer than it used to. Because in 2026, the system isn't just tracking what you do, it's holding on to it, weighting it more heavily, and using it to make much bigger decisions about your ability to stay on the road. There's a small detail hanging in millions of cars right now that most drivers don't think twice about. It might be an air freshener, a parking pass, a tassel, something sentimental, something that's been there for years without ever causing a problem. But in 2026, that same object can now be the reason you get pulled over. 14 states have officially enforced stricter rear view mirror obstruction laws, and the rule is as simple as it is unforgiving. If anything is hanging from your mirror and it's visible to an officer, it can be considered a violation. No exceptions for size, no exceptions for intent. And while the fine itself might seem minor, usually somewhere between $50 and $150, that's not where the real risk comes from. The real issue is what that violation allows. It gives law enforcement probable cause to initiate a traffic stop. And once that stop happens, everything else comes into play. Your license, your registration, your vehicle condition, anything else that might lead to additional citations or complications. That's why this law is getting attention, not because of the penalty on its own, but because of what it opens the door to. And what's catching people off guard is how normal these items feel. Dealership tags, religious symbols, even lightweight air fresheners. Things that never seemed like a problem before are now being treated as legitimate reasons to pull someone over. So, the safest move here is straightforward. If it hangs from your mirror, take it down, because in the current enforcement environment, even the smallest detail can become the starting point for something much bigger. And that idea that small changes can carry much larger consequences becomes even more real when you look at how 2026 is affecting not just how we drive, but who is allowed to keep driving in the first place. One of the most debated updates this year centers around drivers over the age of 65. Several states have begun rolling out mandatory cognitive screening as part of the license renewal process. What used to be a simple vision test is now being expanded to include digital assessments that measure reaction time, spatial awareness, and decision making speed. On top of that, new physician reporting requirements in certain areas mean that doctors are now obligated to notify the DMV if they observe signs of cognitive decline that could impact driving ability. The goal is safety, but the implications are deeply personal. For many, driving represents independence. And now that independence is tied to passing a more complex and ongoing evaluation process. At the same time, another requirement is emerging in states that deal with harsher weather conditions. Mandatory tire tread inspections tied directly to vehicle registration. In places like Maine, Vermont, New Hampshire, Alaska, and Minnesota, drivers must now meet a minimum tread depth of 432 of an inch, double the previous federal baseline. If your tires don't meet that requirement, your registration renewal is denied until they're replaced. No extensions, no temporary approvals, and that creates a financial pressure point. Because if you show up expecting a routine renewal and fail inspection, you're suddenly facing the immediate cost of a full tire replacement just to stay legally on the road. These changes might affect different groups in different ways, but they all point to the same underlying shift. Driving in 2026 is no longer just about how you behave behind the wheel, it's about meeting a growing set of conditions, physical, mechanical, and regulatory, that determine whether you're allowed to be there at all. And before we go further, here's something to keep in mind. Most drivers are going to get caught by at least one of these changes simply because they don't know they exist yet, but now you do. And that awareness is what separates someone who gets blindsided from someone who stays ahead of it. If you want to keep up with how these laws are evolving, because they are changing fast, make sure you're following along. Because what's coming next moves beyond small fines and minor stops into laws that are already causing serious financial damage, legal trouble, and, in some cases, criminal charges. Now, we get into the part of this list where the consequences stop being inconvenient and start becoming serious. Because law number 3 isn't just catching people off guard. It's turning everyday drivers into criminal cases over something most of them don't even realize is a problem. And it all comes down to your license plate. In 2026, multiple states have reclassified any form of license plate obstruction as a much more severe offense. And when we say obstruction, we're not just talking about someone deliberately trying to hide their plate. The definition now includes anything that interferes with how a camera reads it: covers, frames, coatings, even completely transparent protectors. The assumption built into the law is simple: if it affects visibility to a sensor, it's a violation. And in states like Texas, Virginia, New York, Colorado, Washington, Illinois, Georgia, and Michigan, that violation can now escalate far beyond a ticket. In some jurisdictions, it's being treated as a felony level offense, especially if there's any suggestion that the obstruction could be used to avoid tolls or automated enforcement. That means potential court appearances, thousands in fines, and in extreme cases, a permanent mark on your record. What's making this so widespread is how common these items are: dealership frames that partially cover the state name, decorative frames that slightly overlap registration stickers, clear plastic covers that people installed just to protect against dirt or weather. For years, these were normal. Now they're liabilities. There was a case where a driver bought a used car that came with a slightly tinted plate cover already installed. They didn't think twice about it until they were pulled over. What followed wasn't just a citation, but a legal situation that required representation, cost thousands in fees, and could have escalated further depending on how intent was interpreted. And that's the key word here: intent. Even if you didn't install it, even if you didn't know, enforcement doesn't always stop at the surface level. If it looks like something that could interfere with automated systems, it becomes your responsibility. And enforcement is ramping up fast. Officers are being trained to specifically look for anything that prevents a license plate from being perfectly readable, not just to the human eye, but to electronic systems. In some cases, vehicles have even been flagged for impoundment if the plate isn't fully compliant. That's how aggressive this has become. So, the safest and really the only move here is total clarity. No covers, no frames, no extras, just the plate exactly as issued, because this is the law that's catching the most people right now. And it's doing it without warning. And if that feels invasive, the next law takes it a step further. Not by changing what's on your car, but by tracking whether you're even allowed to be driving it in real time. The grace period for insurance lapses is effectively gone. In 2026, several states have fully integrated their DMV systems with insurance providers, creating a live connection that updates instantly. The moment your policy expires, is canceled, or even briefly lapses due to a missed payment, that information is transmitted directly into a statewide database. And from there, it becomes visible to enforcement systems almost immediately. Patrol cars, highway scanners, and fixed plate readers can now detect uninsured vehicles as they pass by. No traffic stop required to discover it. Your status is already known before you're even pulled over. And if you are stopped, the consequences have escalated. In multiple states, driving without active insurance is no longer treated as a fixable issue. Officers now have the authority to impound the vehicle on the spot because it's classified as an active risk on the road. But the deeper shift isn't just about whether you have insurance. It's about how your driving behavior is now tied to it. Modern vehicles come equipped with event data recorders, often referred to as black boxes. These systems track things like braking patterns, acceleration, cornering, and speed variations. Under updated 2026 policies, insurance companies are increasingly allowed to access a version of that data or a summarized safety score when evaluating your policy. And here's where it becomes a trade-off most drivers don't realize they're making. If you agree to share that data, your rates may reflect your driving habits. But if you choose not to, if you opt out for privacy reasons, some insurers now place you into a higher risk category by default. Not because of what you did, but because of what you chose not to share. So the system shifts again. You're not just being evaluated by what happens on the road, you're being evaluated by what your car reports behind the scenes. And that means the definition of safe driving is no longer just visible behavior. It's data, constant, silent, and increasingly influential. And now we get to the biggest shift of all, one that doesn't just change how laws are enforced, but changes who or what is actually in control when you're behind the wheel. Starting with 2026 model vehicles, a new federal mandate requires advanced impaired driving detection systems to be built directly into the car. You may have heard it called a kill switch, but officially it's referred to as passive monitoring technology. And the way it works is far more involved than most people realize. Inside the vehicle, sensors and cameras continuously track driver behavior. That includes eye movement, head position, steering patterns, lane consistency, subtle indicators that the system uses to determine whether you might be impaired. On paper, the goal is clear: reduce accidents caused by intoxication or fatigue. But here's where it changes the driving experience entirely. If the system determines that your behavior crosses a certain threshold, it doesn't just alert you. It can actively limit or prevent the vehicle from operating. In other words, the car can decide you're not fit to drive and act on that decision. Now, add another layer to that. In certain states, law enforcement has begun integrating with vehicle systems in ways that allow for remote intervention during high-risk situations like pursuits, which means the concept of control is no longer limited to the person in the driver's seat.